We're just about 2 weeks into the new Season 7, the Season of Witchcraft, for Diablo 4, and I just spent an hour and 40 minutes recording a video about all the feedback that I would like to give to the game, and I realize nobody is going to watch an hour and 40 minute long video, so I'm going to try to do this significantly faster. It's still going to be long. Buckle up, I'm going to go through these things significantly faster than I did previously. I'm just going to highlight the ideas. I'll include a link to this document down below. I'm going to be sending both this video and the document directly into the developers, and I'm going to try to do my best to take off my hat as a Diablo partner here and really just sit down as a guy who likes playing Diablo 4 and would really like to see a lot of the game get better, not only for me, but for the different demographics that play it. But the first thing that I would like to do, just so that the developers know that I'm not sitting here just trying to absolutely beat the crap out of them, is really give them props where props are due. Season 7 is definitely the best experience of Diablo 4 that we've had thus far. I think that this season really nailed the expectation for Diablo 4 being the best casual ARPG that you can play, the best dad gamer, the best single parent with only 2 minutes to play every single day experience. You could sit down and do it on couch co-op, or you could just kind of slay demons for an hour or two after work. And I think that that actually serves an incredibly important purpose in the current ecosystem of ARPGs. But on top of that, the game is just barely on the cusp of being able to offer tryhards and sweaty gamers like myself enough of a legitimate carrot on a stick to feel like we have accomplished something when we walk into a season. But if you've gone through and played the Witchtides, if you've gone through and done a root hold, you'll know that this is definitely the most fun that you can have while playing the game. There's so much stuff going on constantly. You're inundated with loot. Everything is just raining from the sky. The new system for whispers is really cool. By the way, if you actually take these ravens out of the game and I have to teleport back to the Tree of Whispers coming next season, I'll literally never do another one ever again. That's part of the feedback that I have for later on. But I think that there's even a really good duality here between the experience that the casual has and the experience that a tryhard has. Yes, everybody's getting into Torment 4 super fast. Yes, progression is the fastest that's ever been. But the new borrowed power from the season isn't something that you just unlock in a day. In fact, I'm 2 weeks in and I've only made the occult gems that I need for a single one of my builds. And I think that that's a good thing. I actually think that it's pretty cool that more than a week into the season is when I finally built into the borrowed power, because my character needed it at that point to be able to push further into the pit. So I had something that I had just been saving up resources for that I could go build into and learn about and implement into my build to get even stronger. It wasn't just like I unlocked them and all of a sudden I was just blasting through stuff. It was a steady drip of additional power being added to my character. And basically, I would like to see every season moving forward emulate this difference between blasting through the normal content and then having to work hard to do harder content. That's the thing that I think Diablo 4 is missing the most of, is opportunities for people to have that legitimate, juicy, big content type to be able to build into to further progress their character, giving them a reason to play for more than the first 4 or 5 days. But now that I've glazed them enough, I hope that the developers who are watching this video ultimately understand that anything that I communicate here is not coming from a place of attempting to be harsh, but instead attempting to be honest. Some of the points that I have here, I really wrestled with how I would communicate these things. And that's why, again, I said I'm gonna take off my hat of a partner and just try to be a regular person playing this game and understanding the fact that some of these things are frustrating and I do wish that they were different. I created a 5-page document. Now I know it says 8 pages here, but it's because I blew up the text. But at normal Arial 11 font, this is 5 pages of feedback. I'm going to go through them so much faster than I did previously, and I'm not going to stop on any one. If you want to read it, again, go ahead and check out the link below. The developers are going to have this in their hands so they can just kind of read it at their own will. But I'm also going to have timestamps. So just read through the timestamp. If you say hey, I'm interested in that one topic, hop down to there. I won't be offended. First, I want to talk about general thoughts. These are things that didn't really fit into any of the categories that I had down below and are more so just things I came across as we were thinking about it. Things have been nerfed or changed in the past because it was causing a problem, and the game is just so different at this point, and they have not been revisited or readdressed, where I feel like the developers could basically go through their own changelog and go, hey, remember that thing that we nerfed back in Season 1? Is that still a problem? And if no, basically unnerf those things walking into the next season, and let's take another round at figuring out whether or not they need to be balanced or changed. A great example here would be Corpse Explosion, which basically just got nerfed into the ground because Infinimus was kind of the only Necromancer build that worked for a while, and that hasn't been true since Season 1, and sadly that skill has never been revisited. I'm going to go more into detail later on about itemization, but basically I feel like itemization is itemization's biggest problem in this game. And what I mean by that is that ultimately the change to 3 affixes and 2 tempers, where the 2 tempers have to be so powerful that they define the build that they're in, has made it so that not only regular items, but unique items too now need to all do the same thing to even be considered viable. Basically, I think you need to take the chance to deal double damage affix and remove it from the game. It is ruining unique itemization, where every single unique item that could fit into a slot just has to have this stat on it now, which basically just means that unique items will always be the best item for a build, and I think that that's a pretty huge problem. This next point is the one that I really struggled with the most on how to include it in this video. I'm going to take 2 seconds to explain my background for why I feel very strongly about this. Before I was a content creator, before I was a Diablo 2 speedrunner, I worked for a pharmacy benefits management company. I was basically a product owner and a bit of a project manager as well. I was on the customer facing side of things, but was also responsible for our software working in very high-end scenarios where any issue would cause literal people's lives to be impacted. And what that meant was I spent all of my day sitting with the actual developers for the software that we had and sat with the QA teams and would do manual QA myself. There were so many times where a new feature would be rolling out and I would be testing it in the test environment before it hit live production to ultimately find stuff. That's why I think I do what I do here in this community so well, if I'm willing to pat myself on the back. But I'm not a developer. At heart, I'm not the one sitting there making code. I don't know what this game looks like under the hood. I'm not the person doing QA. I do not presume to understand the struggles that the developers face. But what I do know as a player is that it's very frustrating and ultimately very tiring to know that if we're getting a new toy, that new toy is going to be bugged. And I don't mean it does a little bit more damage than it should. I don't mean, oh, it doesn't interact with this one niche thing. If people are following on Reddit, I posted a mega thread of bugs related to the new Bone Spear pants in Dira's memory. They turn your bone skill into a blood skill. They make it eat life to be able to spawn additional bone spears out of corpses. Except you don't actually need corpses. They don't interact with the new aspect called bone dusters. They don't interact with our previous unique item called Deathless Visage. They don't spawn echoes. They don't overpower. They don't ultimately do damage. They don't pierce through targets. They don't summon bone shards. They don't act as bone spears at all. Now that's a lot, but the problem is the expectation, at least from the Necromancer side and from my community, is that I'm going to spend the majority of my season in the testing dummy room, figuring out what these bugs are and ultimately reporting them. And while hilariously enough, that's basically why I have a career in this space at all, I know that at least for other players, it's just very frustrating never being able to be actually excited about what's coming because you never know if it's going to work. I don't know what the fix for that is, but I do need to express this frustration because it's really turning people off from their ability to be excited about this game, and I hear it every single day. You go follow any of my Reddit threads, you go follow any of my YouTube videos, you go follow any part of my Discord. It's basically people just saying, hey, before I get excited, is this thing good? And it kind of sucks that that has become the expectation for the game, and I know that it's probably a very heavy lift and will take a lot of time to solve whatever that is, but it is a prevalent issue. And if there were a way for somebody like me or more people in the community to be able to positively impact this, I would love to know what we could do, more so outside of a PTR, more so outside of just reporting the bugs. I would love to be able to be a better resource for this thing, for the Diablo team. And the level of hubris that goes into saying that is not lost on me. But there you go. That's a frustration. I'll get off my pedestal and the rest of these will go a lot faster. I think that there's a bit of dissonance between the experience of the casual player and, the elite tryhard player of this video game when it comes to progression. This is a very hot topic because everybody experiences progression differently, but I think I've found one little key piece that could be modified that would, I believe, only positively impact the outcome. Right now, I think that progression is too fast. Through the core experience of the game, I think people get to Torment 4 too quickly. Not that they don't deserve to be there, but that they actually haven't gotten the gear or gotten the expertise with the build or understood the nuances enough to be able to succeed in Torment 4. And it's because getting into Torment 4 is a little bit too easy. Basically, I think that the pit level that you need to clear to get into a higher Torment level has to be slightly adjusted, maybe 5 tiers up. And I think that that would give people a much more organic experience of needing to get the gear required to be able to succeed in that Torment. It would not change the elitist experience, but it would give casual players so much more of an opportunity to learn how to pilot a build. I have an analogy where if you ever played any of the tabletop games, D&D or Pathfinder, or if you're some kind of cringe lord, Shadowrun, shout out to my Shadowrun enjoyers, I don't know why I'm crapping on you here, but the idea is that if I were to give you an epic level character, level 20 character, with starter gear and send you out to go fight a Tarrasque, you would have no idea what to do there. You might have the skills, you might have a character sheet that tells you all the stuff that you have, but the stuff that you have won't empower you enough, and you won't really know the combos. You won't really know how it works. You haven't meshed with the idea of the build enough to be effective. Two people will pilot things very differently based off their experience. And if people had to reach higher requirements so that their build was actually functional in higher tiers, I think that they would have a better time once they got in there to be able to successfully farm. Getting into different systems, these are just the high points of these systems, and I tried to just go through and read them all from the game and be like, what exists and what could be better. The first one would be Renown. Did you know that if you go complete Renown in every one of the areas every season, you actually get 1 million gold at the end of each one of them, meaning 6 million gold? I didn't remember that. Why? Because nobody touches Renown anymore. I think that Renown was a very cool concept if the final reward of doing Renown was like a large cache of materials needed for crafting and a significantly larger amount of gold, so that players had a way of getting in with enough resources to be able to start doing stuff. Not enough to go infinite, but enough to like actually do things in the game. I think that you would see a lot more people engaging with this system and appreciating kind of how it tutorializes playing the game in a much more meaningful way. I had a whole thing where I went and found one of these guys. Basically, there are rare elites in the game. Do you remember these? No? Well, it's because they got nerfed into the ground and then never touched ever again. There are monsters that spawn in specific parts of the world that all drop very unique rare items. The issue here being that since they're rare items, they can never be ancestral. Since they're rare items, they can only have 2 stats on them. And in the past, they had such unique stats that we would actually hard farm for them and then re-roll one of their stats off to a different one and then use them, even though they had less stats than the rest of the items in the game, because they were that cool and they offered such niche options that you would go farm for them. These got nerfed because at one point they could roll with a higher item power, and since weapon damage was directly related to item power, they just made every other piece of gear in the game trivial and just strictly worse to use. So they got nerfed and they made them drop 1/4 of the time, which basically means that if you're newer to this game, you probably have no idea what I'm talking about. I think it's incredibly sad that these have fallen by the wayside, and they basically just pop every once in a while. You find a weird piece of gear on them and it has flavor text and you kind of don't know why. I would love to see them drop legendary pieces of gear now so that they have 3 stats, or maybe they still only have 2 stats, but they are either testing beds for stats that aren't in the game yet, or they're old style stats like damage while injured or additional damage over time values, just stats that don't exist in the game anymore. Just in case they happen to enable a thing, people could go farm it and try out this cool way of building something that they've never done before. The biggest problem that I have with itemization as a system, outside of my general thoughts above, is that unique items stopped being unique entirely. Unique items now just say 4 really good stats for your build with a unique aspect that you will absolutely have to use, which always defines the meta version of a build, unless there is a better unique in that same slot. And as opposed to fundamentally changing how the build works and giving you an alternative, it is the way to build a character. And I think that while a casual player really just enjoys finding a rare unique item and putting it on, they drop like candy at this point. So I think that we could go back to them being interesting as opposed to 4 of the best stats in the game in an aspect that you could never beat with any other option. It's just, I'll be honest with you, just kind of lame. Masterworking as a system, this is not unique, you know, every pun intended there. This is not a unique bit of feedback, but Masterworking is so heinous, I literally don't engage with this system in the game. This is my end-all be-all character. I have like nearly best-in-slot stuff across all of my gear, and you'll notice that my Masterworking is complete trash. Here, complete trash. On my weapon, complete trash. I have not triple Masterwork crit on a single stat here. Why? Because I refuse to Masterwork. There is nothing interesting about Masterworking. It's either you get lucky or you don't. There's no way to impact it. And if at the very least we could reset down to 4 out of 12 and reset down to 8 out of 12, while this wouldn't fundamentally change the fact that I think that Masterworking ultimately as a system kind of just needs to go away, but it would make it so much less irritating to engage with it, I would actually get to having best in slot gear. Maybe I would see what is the ultimate try-hard, sweaty version of my build if I didn't have to sit here and keep clicking a roulette wheel with no positive outcomes until I just get bored of clicking it or run out of veiled crystals. Sorry, I let a lot get into my tone here. I hate Masterworking. I like the core concept of it, cool. I like that. Clicking that button 4 times, waiting for the little bit of loading, checking the stats, seeing that I missed it, and then spending 5 million gold and however many resources that it is to immediately reset, it's heinous. And if we could at least be able to reset it down to different ones, I feel like a lot more people would get to experience what it means to have a fully built out character. Tempering is kind of in a similar boat, but I think I won't necessarily have the same opinion as the majority of people. I think that breaking a piece of gear is ultimately very healthy and good. You know, this ultimately comes from like a very shared experience of like Path of Exile. If you haven't voled it, it's not real. It's not real until you vol it. Do you have the vols to do it? Project Diablo 2, which is a great Diablo 2 LOD modded experience by Sent by Something in Team. If you haven't seen it, go check it out. But they took that vol concept and added Whirlstone shards so you can corrupt pieces of gear. And basically it wasn't real unless you hit it with a shard. We got this kind of watered down version of it where tempering ultimately filled in the additional affixes. And the thing that I don't like about it is that I have pieces of gear that have 4, 5, 6 more temper roll attempts on them, and I will never try to get a perfect roll on anything. This is my ring. I hit both damage while fortified and ultimate skill cooldown. Luckily, I got a perfect roll on ultimate skill cooldown, but I got a mid roll on damage while fortified, and I have 4 more attempts to temper here. I will never put this back into the tempering menu because if I manage to roll off of damage while fortified, I will brick this ring and I will not find a replacement, or I could go spend another billion gold or so to go get a better replacement and then have a chance to brick that one as well. Bricking it is perfectly fine. What I don't like is how lame it is that the moment that I hit a stat, even if it's a minimum roll on that stat, I'm fine with taking that because it is so unlikely that I will roll it to a higher value that it is not worth the RNG. I believe that if this was like enchanting and I could choose to keep the last roll, people would experience tempering in a much more healthy way. And again, similar to Masterworking, actually see the end progression of their gear actually work towards a perfect character, which is ultimately what a Diablo ARPG is all about. It's all about very slowly replacing your gear with more perfect versions of it until you have a done character and then leaving them in your own little hall of remembrance and just going again next season. The other thing about tempering that I would really like to see changed is that when you use a temper reset scroll, which is a great addition to the game, I think it is phenomenal, you can't change the options. Like you can't actually change the category of tempering, even though I've reset tempering. So I can't take a piece of gear and transform it into a piece for another build. I have to find the exact same amulet with the exact same stats and then differently temper it. And at that point, I don't feel like we're having this organic experience of finding gear and it having a journey with us. I'm instead time locking gear to a specific build. And now that we have the armory, ostensibly so I could play different builds, I want to be able to take that piece of gear that I earned and take it further on my journey with me. So finding the technology to be able to allow us to pick different categories if we reset on tempering would be pretty chill. I think that this one like really only applies to me and Ava from Maxroll, but basically the training dummy now has the ability to turn off damage variance, except it doesn't. It only turns off skill damage variance, but your weapon also has variance, and also some items in the game, like unique effects in the game, do or do not have variance. It's kind of a little bit mishmash of which ones do and which ones don't. Basically, just turning off damage variance needs to make it so that I always do the same damage every single time so that we can properly test stuff. Coming back from Path of Exile 2 and being able to check a leaderboard and be able to see who's the highest in the hardcore leaderboard, not Elon Musk, remember he cheated. Sorry, I'll get off my pedestal. But the idea that leaderboards exist was something that was so fundamental to my experience in like Diablo 2 that I forgot how important it was and how missing it is in Diablo 4. We had them for the gauntlet, that was cool, except it was kind of bad optically for the team because there were so often exploits and bugs that people knew they were getting screwed over. Like right now, people assume they're getting screwed over by bugs, but with the gauntlet leaderboard, they knew it. But that's because it was tied to a score. If bare minimum we got a leaderboard that just told you who has reached max Paragon level and who did it the fastest, and you're able to check their build, already you add this like sense of drive and accomplishment and being able to see where you're, I'm 4,000th in 500, and at the end of today I bumped up 1 rank. Yeah, I'm grinding. It's something that like really gives the life to an ARPG, and I didn't realize how important that was to me until I came back to Diablo 4 and didn't have it anymore. Mercenaries were added to the game. They're actually very cool. I feel like they avoided all the pitfalls I was very afraid that they might have experienced with Mercenaries, but for right now, rather than having a menu option to be able to change my mercenary, I have a menu option to teleport teleport to the Mercenary Den to go manually change my mercenaries there, and then go back to the content that I'm doing, go back to the training room that I'm trying to test stuff in. We just need to be able to change out our mercenaries from that menu UI. And I feel like the button existing to teleport back to the den was them realizing like, oh crap, they can't change their mercenaries, what do we do? Well, we can at least give them a teleport button for now. It really feels like a bandage. I could say a lot about the Paragon, and the first time that I recorded this, I think I went on for about 20 minutes. Basically, I think that the 5 board option was a mistake. I think we have to have 6 boards, because basically casuals are gonna have the exact same experience either way, but when they get down to those last like 50 to 100 points and they already have all their glyphs, and they realize that they would have to fully respec their boards to actually optimally travel through the boards, because doing it while you're leveling and doing it when you have all of your points available are 2 very different looking board setups. They hate it, so they just don't do it. For people like me who actually care about optimizing and like care about getting the most out of a build, if you take a Bloodwave Necromancer and I take a Bloodwave Necromancer and we both know the same amount of Bloodwave, we will build the exact same Paragon board, and that's just not interesting in any meaningful way. And then my second bit of feedback related to the fact that glyphs ultimately kind of suck, and here's why. This glyph says multiply your damage 3 times. First off, it says you do 22% more critical strike damage. It also says for every 5 points of dex that you get 22 additive crit damage, which ultimately just multiplies your damage when you crit. And then on top of that, it says when you crit, you do more damage. This isn't interesting. This isn't fun. This doesn't make me feel like I'm building my character in a meaningful way. I just pick the glyphs that all say multiply my damage the most. There's a little bit of nuance when you get to stuff like Abyssal, where this modifies your rare nodes, and since their rare node says damage while healthy, I'm actually getting more bonus for my class. Like, sure, yeah, that level of expertise exists. I'm not saying it doesn't, but the glyphs themselves really aren't doing that. And I really wish that glyphs all said something cool. Like this one. What if it said, when you crit, apply half of your damage as bleeding damage over time? Or what if Abyssal said, you now deal shadow damage as opposed to your original damage? Or what if the Imbiber stat said, after drinking a potion, all of your damage applies barrier to you? Something along these lines, so that the glyphs fundamentally change what the character does, you know, modify to an element, or apply a different effect, or modify what your build will be doing, rather than just saying, multiply your damage. Because right here, especially after the stat squish, right after the stat squish, our glyphs also got, once you unlock the highest tier of them, you get even more damage multiplication. And it really begged the question, why and who is this for? I also have a lot of opinions about the skill tree, and it's because I come from playing the Necromancer in particular. But to just give a little bit of history here, the Spiritborn was released with the Vessel of Hatred, and the Spiritborn skill tree asked the question, what if every skill on this tree could be modified to synergize with any other skill on the tree? Meaning you can truly build it in whatever way you want to and always find a line of synergy. That doesn't exist for other classes. Greatest example is Corpse Explosion. Corpse Explosion is a corpse and a corruption skill. If we go look at the other corruption skills that exist for the Necromancer, we will find that Corpse Explosion exists. We don't have any basic skills. We don't have any core skills. Our curses are corruption skills. Corpse Tendrils is a corruption skill, and then we don't have any ultimates and we don't have any key passives. Why? Because very clearly there was a thing that said corruption at one point, and then that got axed from the skill tree. It really feels like the Necromancer skill tree in particular has only ever been about half-baked, and that things were just removed from it. All of that is to say, none of the skills in our skill tree really synergize in a meaningful way. We kind of just paint by colors, and if it's purple, you take all the purple things. If it's red, you take all the red things. If it's white, you take all the white things. But nowadays, you actually just take all the red and purple things anyways, because they now work for everything. And then you just use the red ultimate and key passive, as opposed to any of the other ones, unless it's Soul Rift. Outside of the Necromancer problems in particular, I wish that they would take the learnings from how the Spiritborn was developed and retroactively apply that to the skill trees of the legacy classes, so that we also got to enjoy this level of diversity of synergies in them, so that players could truly do different stuff with their builds. I have a hot take for aspects in this game, and it is that none of them should ever directly multiply your damage. They should only ever indirectly multiply your damage, but aspects truly should always serve the purpose of functionally changing what a skill or an interaction will do to allow you to build into it. Here is the title aspect. If the title aspect only said Bloodwave now fires 3 Bloodwaves instead of 1, but you cannot recast Bloodwave until its duration is over, it would indirectly multiply your damage, right? 1 instead of 3, that's a 300% total damage base, but it comes with this cooldown thing. So managing your cooldown becomes a part of it, managing monster positioning becomes part of it. it allows you to play the build differently. You do get damage multiplication, but it is through skill and like management of the skill itself. What title also says is that your other 2 blood waves are going to do 480% of their base damage. So instead of this just saying you get 3 blood waves, which is 300% damage, it says so you get 2 480 and then 1 100. That is 1060% damage from a single aspect. You can see why blood wave is kind of a problem for balancing. The almost opposite is true of the other build enabling aspect, which is Ultimate Shadow. It turns Blood Wave into a Darkness skill. It now does shadow damage, and while it adds on this damage over time aspect in this Desecrated Ground, which is kind of our subclass power, which sadly also isn't really supported on the Necromancer, but I already made videos kind of touching on that before. But this aspect does indirectly multiply my damage because I get to use different Paragon Glyphs, I get to dip into different additive damage buckets, I get to use different passives, but it doesn't directly multiply my damage. It functionally changes the behavior of this skill. All of this is in direct opposite of Damned Aspect. Sure, Damned Aspect says you have to curse a target. You would always be cursing a target. Cursing a target is the strongest thing you can do on the Necromancer. But what it ultimately says is you do 50% more damage. That's it. Nothing else comes close to it because nothing else will get up to a 55% total damage multiplier other than Sacrificial, which is just a whole other thing. Actually, Sacrificial is kind of cool. But aspects that just say you multiply your damage are not interesting. They aren't cool. They just inflate your damage numbers. And the fact that generic damage multipliers exist too, and those ones basically just permanently rotate. We don't ever like functionally change what a build does. What we do is we take the weakest damage multiplier and we replace it with the newest unique item or the newest aspect that is a higher damage multiplier. So if aspects never directly multiplied your damage and only functionally change what a build does, people would still get power out of them, but it would allow you to explore different options for your build and different interactions for your build, rather than just putting the biggest damage numbers next to an X that you could find. Materials in this game are functionally different than materials in Diablo 2. In Diablo 2, you crafted in the Heraldric Cube by picking up trash off the ground and putting it into the cube and getting an outcome. In this game, we craft, we can't engage with them with any way other than just using them in sinks. We can't trade them, we can't give them to other players, we can't sell them on the market to have an opportunity to be able to like target farm materials, and then if we don't personally need them, giving them to our community, giving them to our clan members, trading them off to a friend who's, you know, maybe they care about masterworking. I only care about tempering, and we use different stuff for that. Basically, the game doesn't really have an identity for where you get each individual material so much, and there are so many content types where materials could be tied to them, so that if you wanted to be a person who only farmed iron chunks and like only did legions, and you made a character that was just really good at doing that, and you swapped to them whenever legions were showing up, and then you sold them on the market to get the gold for you to buy your veiled crystals, because all you care about is masterworking or something. I feel like we're missing out on this opportunity to be able to use these materials in more actual crafting means where like they have a value and we can use them to afford the other stuff that we want to do. And in general, I just wish that like content types had more deeply tied identities to what you got from them for these purposes. Buffs on our skill bar here, this is a little bit of an issue and it's mostly for people trying to push the pit. But you have a skill bar and there are lines of buffs above them. And which buffs you can see, depending on how many you have, is just kind of a crapshoot. Your first bar will always be your 2 rune words that you have, as well as your 3 incense, and your 1 elixir, so that's already 6, and that's basically the entirety of the bar. And then key buffs that you need to be aware of, their timers, or whether or not you've triggered them, aren't visible at all times. I would like to be able to set a priority list for buffs so that they show up in that order, that you would be able to change from your character sheet, like from the effect sheet, similar to how they allowed us to change which currencies we see in our character sheet. And then talking about the character sheet, great segue here. It's broken and y'all need to fix it. And I'm going to be a little bit harsh about this one because I feel very strongly this is negatively impacting your player's ability to be informed, educated, and make good decisions, and it's to the benefit of nobody. I have 1,127 damage while fortified. I actually have that much. That's important to know. I also have 357.7 damage while healthy. I actually don't. I only have 311.7, but it says that I have 357. If I were to go activate more buffs, I would have even more, but I don't really. But why is this an issue? Well, all said and told, I have something around, what is this? 1,485 total additive damage. if you believe the overinflated character sheet. The issue with that being that Bloodwave does believe my character sheet. It takes the overinflated numbers and it generates 30% of that as a damage multiplier for my skill. This gets even more heinous when you look at something like critical strike damage. Critical strike damage, I only have 146, but the game says I have 551 because I have a lot of different multipliers that act on crit damage, except multipliers don't really act on additive damage. If you crit, your crit multiplier applies. It doesn't apply to your additive damage. That's not actually how the game works at all. But the stat sheet includes it here for the purpose of simplicity, so that people know when they add stuff onto it, their damage goes up, similar to attack power. Attack power doesn't mean anything. I have a question for you. I have 28,000 attack power. Is that 28,000 attack power for Bloodwave or for Blight? They have different additive damage, they have different multipliers, one can crit, one can't crit, one can overpower, one can't overpower. So which one is my 28,000 attack power for? Is this for Blood Mist, or is it for my Corpse Explosion? Is this for my Corpse Tendrils? These numbers don't mean anything. And it used to be easy for me to educate players to tell them that these numbers don't mean anything. I've had to put out a video at least once every 2 seasons, because it inevitably says these numbers matter and everybody else is wrong, and they're not, and it's very easy to prove it. The issue here being that since things scale off of these overinflated numbers, sometimes, now they are right. So they are both wrong and nobody should believe them, but they are right. The biggest perpetrator here is overpower. This overpower damage, I actually only have 734 additive overpower damage. The game says I have 5,000. You might think, wow, that's overinflated. The funny part here is this isn't even close to how much additive damage I actually have from overpower, because overpower also gains damage from my maximum life and fortify, which doesn't modify the stat sheet. So this is both hilariously overinflated and not real, and also a small percentage of the actual amount of additive damage that I have from overpower. And the player who doesn't know these systems is completely uninformed, looks at this, thinks they're doing something good, and then they go post on Reddit saying all my damage numbers are big, why aren't I killing stuff? I have 300,000 attack power, why am I not killing stuff? And it's because none of it's real. Please fix this. Like, please. One, make it so that they show the actual additive damage that you truly have, and then list the multipliers that are available for it underneath if you need to. Secondly, add breakpoints to things like the attack speed calculator and include the fact that there are actually 2 sets of attack speed caps. You can go all the way up to 200%. Please make it so that skills in the game and effects in the game do not scale over these overinflated numbers, because you don't actually build into them organically to get the best output from your build. You find as many ways of abusing this overinflation to get that number as high as possible, to then empower a different system that ultimately doesn't even care about these stats. It just makes the game harder to understand. It probably makes the game near impossible for you all to balance, considering you keep adding new versions of this to the game. Like in the most recent season, this is where we got the scaling on our ultimates for this, and it immediately had to get nerfed down to 15% of its previous output, and it's still too strong. I don't know how there is a healthy way forward with this, and it needs to be different. For the stash in the inventory, basically I don't really care about having more stash pages, except for the fact that we now have an entire set of runes that if you have one of each of them take up nearly an entire stash page, as well as an overabundance of keys for all the different content types. So tributes, amboss mats, and our consumables, and then also keys to go do the root hold, and then also nightmare dungeons, and then also infernal compasses. Basically, our inventory cannot hold all the things that we need, and I end up just leaving them on the ground. And it really sucks knowing that they're just so low priority I don't have to care about them. If I wanted to include all the things from my inventory in my stash to have them available for all my characters, it would take up 2+ stash pages. I don't really care about this, but I absolutely understand why everybody else does. So either more stash pages or specialized stash pages that fit more in them, that are particular for like our socketables, our consumables, and our keys. This one is actually, I think, a pretty big problem, and I would really like to see it addressed. Gambling has always been the redheaded stepchild, the black sheep of the game systems here, where it doesn't really have an identity. Right now, you'll gamble 2,500 obols and get an entire inventory of magic and rare items with like 5 or 6 legendary items, and very rarely a unique, and even more rarely an ancestral item. I think that right now, obols properly match the drop rates of stuff in the game, but in Torment 4, all magic and rare items just drop as, resources, so we only ever see the legendary items, but the gambling can't do that. So the gambling system just needs to be updated so that, depending on what Torment level you're in, I should only be seeing at least legendary, if not unique and mythic uniques coming out of this. And then also that would inevitably lead to more ancestrals from it as well. Now I'm going to talk about content types. And again, I'm just going to go through these very, very fast because there's a lot of different content types. Helltide. I don't do the Helltide anymore. Getting boss mats is just better by killing goblins and doing whatever the seasonal content type is. Getting gear just sucks from it too after the nerfs to the Blood Maiden. Sitting there for that long to do the Blood Maiden, I basically only do to get a Whisper done or some Cinders. I never actually get drops from her. She drops like 4 pieces of gear and you sit there for multiple minutes. It's just not worth your time. And I would love if Helltides continue to be a source of mind cages that would allow us to juice content by consuming them. You're basically going to see this across the board. I wish that every single content type had a meta progression where I could juice it. Yes, we're talking about the Atlas map from Path of Exile. No, it doesn't have to be that way. It could just be mind cages. It could just be once you complete a content type, you can toggle it so that things around it are harder and more rewarding. And all of this shouldn't just be the loot is better. I think all of this should come along with more armor penalties, more resistance penalties, so that every single build isn't just glass cannon, immune to all damage, just complete survivability, while also stacking on the most damage possible. Like, what if we had to go back to putting survivability aspects on our amulet to actually be able to get through the content to get the reward? How cool would it be if there was this end game meta progression where I do a stronghold and that allows me to flip on a toggle that any events around that section of the area, like rise steps after I do all the strongholds, is now another torment level higher. I have to have more armor and more resistances to survive there, but the loot is better. Let me do this for Helltides with mind cages. The pit is also very weird, where basically if you can do a tier 100, the game no longer gets harder as you go up in pit tiers. It's just you do or do not have the damage. I think every pit tier above that should come with more armor and resistance penalties, and monsters should do more damage. So again, your gear has to get significantly better to go higher in the pit, but everybody can get up to a tier 100 pit so that they can complete their character via Paragon and Glyph leveling. Infernal Hordes. This one's actually 10 out of 10. The only issue with it is that the only way of getting Aether in an Infernal Horde is to do Hellborn, Hellborn, and more Hellborn. Aetherlords really aren't that good. You would always want Hellborn. If you try to do both, you just minimize how often you see each one. Spires just suck, and for whatever reason, completing a Spire doesn't get you progression towards the next event. So killing a Hellborn not only gets you Aether, but also gets you progression towards the next one. Doing Spires doesn't. So doing Spires, doing Aetherlords, and doing Elites just needs to get buffed so that they're legitimate paths forward, so that different builds could be better at doing the Infernal Horde. If all I need to do in a Spire is pull monsters towards me and kill them, I don't need to be a build that nukes everything on the screen, unlike every other build that's actually good at doing them right now. The boss ladder. Oh boy. This is going to be hard. So, one, at least for the Necromancer, Varshan in particular doesn't have any good items other than Deathless Visage and Ring of Sacrilegious Soul, and nobody really needs a Ring of Sacrilegious Soul. People just kind of like it. So please move some of the good items over to Varshan so that running them isn't just a, well, at least I have a chance of dropping a mythic. Similarly, I wish that there were Pinnacle versions of all these bosses. Remember when we had the Tormented version? You would have to put in additional mats and you got more drops out of it and they were harder. Bring that back. These bosses aren't hard in Torment 4. We completely trivialize them before we even do like a tier 100 pit, and that's on the vast majority of builds. Bring back being able to do them as Pinnacle bosses, bring back being able to do them as Tormented versions of the bosses, and again, make it harder. I shouldn't be able to one-shot a player 4 Torment 4 Duriel. I just shouldn't be able to do that. Make it harder. Make it so that the drops are more, so I don't feel like I'm like getting penalized for it being harder as well, but I'm getting a reward for succeeding at the challenge of them being harder. More armor, more res requirements, make it so I can't just run glass cannon everywhere. The Dark Citadel is honestly a super cool content type. I love raids, the issue being that I have no reason to do it because it's not good at getting me anything that I can't get elsewhere. What I would actually like to see be done with the Dark Citadel is make it so that the guaranteed drops for the new aspects and uniques in the game are always part of the Dark Citadel rotation. So instead of just adding them to the current bosses that exist, make it be part of the Dark Citadel so there's a reason to go do that. I know people won't like that. At some point, it has to be okay that in this multiplayer, always online game, we have a reason to do group content that isn't just it's more efficient, but more so you got to have buddies to go do it. I know that sucks for people who think that sucks. I just don't. And there needs to be some space in this game where it's okay for people like me that want a reason to be partied together other than just better drop rates on stuff. World bosses. I really hate what was done with world bosses, this like damage cap that happens on them, because I walk up with my incredibly strong character and I just sit there kind of spitting damage at them, and then we all have to sit there for a bunch of minutes to kill a thing that isn't actually scary. So again, make a Pinnacle version of them. Make it be you have to do all the Strongholds, make it be you have to finish Renown, whatever it is, and then you get to opt into the Pinnacle version of World Bosses. Again, harder to kill, better drops, tie a cool mount to going and killing each one of them. Make it be a challenge, make it be something to actually chase towards. Legion events used to be my most favorite content type, and this has mostly been replaced by Infernal Hordes, not only because Legions got nerfed into the ground for some reason, but they really haven't seen any love given to them, and Infernal Hordes kind of offers you the exact same crazy, hectic, constant go, 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 go experience for strictly better rewards. So I'd love to see something very valuable tied into doing Legion events, so I had a reason to go do them. Cellars, I don't think have to be an endgame system, but I do think that they could be better for early game onboarding of new players, that they could be experiencing mini versions of a lot of the different, like mechanics that they would find later on in the game in these Cellars, and that they could also be more rewarding for them. So make it be every so many Cellars that you do is always guaranteed that like a goblin explosion will come out of it, or something that's very fun for new players to engage with, that rewards them for going in there and doesn't leave them as like this weird forgotten concept back from when we thought this was going to be an open world game. PvP is another thing I don't do, but people do it, and you put PvP zones in the game. Now I understand they were in the game just so that you could say, hey, they're there for people who want to do it. You can mostly just leave them be. But I think that we're just ignoring part of the player base here, and not only that, losing out on opportunities to be hype. I think every season there should be a PvP event. You get a notification, 1 week from now we're going to be doing a PvP event. There will be a leaderboard for it. Whoever collects the most ears at the end of it gets a title. They get the PvP title. This is something that was in World of Warcraft. PvP wasn't originally like a primary focus for it, but it continued to get iterated on because people liked it. And I think if you did it here, you'd be better serving a large part of your community who cares about this thing. Strongholds. Pinnacle Strongholds. I already touched on this earlier, but basically I think doing Strongholds in an area should unlock a higher level of difficulty for that area. Gives you a reason to actually go do all of them. And then in addition to that, like a toggle. So like, hey, I've done 2 out of the 3 of them. That means this area is 2 out of the 3 harder. Is this more complicated? Yes. Is it cool as all hell? Also yes. I've been saying Pinnacle a lot, but let's talk about Pinnacle Bosses, or Pinnacle Boss Lilith. One, I understand that Lilith is not meant to be farmed, so that's why she doesn't drop loot. Here's the problem. She does drop loot. She drops like 2 items, and it sucks every single time a new player walks in, finally beats her, and then gets these 2 items, goes to Reddit and goes, what the hell was this? It happens every single season. It's been going on since the game released. I think the first time you kill a Pinnacle boss, Lilith in this example, it drops a deluge of loot. Fill the screen with loot. Make it so much you gotta go back 3 or 4 times to get all the loot. You did it. You killed Lilith. Does this matter for the blasters? Does the gear that she drops really going to impact anything? No, absolutely not. Does it give that dude who's just been sitting there dying again and again and again and finally gets it done, the screen goes dark, they get their message, their spark, their title, their mount, and then the screen explodes with loot? You know how stoked people would be? There would be a new clip of that every single season of somebody going, I finally killed her. Loot everywhere. Make it cool that one time. And now let's talk about the fact that bare minimum, every expansion needs to see a new Pinnacle boss added to the game. I need a new Lilith level experience for us to go and smash our heads against for a while to be able to continue to feel like excellence is being strived for in the game. Every season just needs one. I need the Pinnacle version of the Mephisto Wolf. I'm going to need Pinnacle version of actual Mephisto when the next expansion drops. Lilith is very cool. Y'all figured out how to make her fair, and it quickly became one of my favorite things to do in the game, even though it received so much bad optics and press to start off with. Don't let this die by the wayside just like elite mobs. Then my last thing, minor pain point to zoom in on. Everybody's seen Riker's video, everybody has experienced this. Opening up a cache was supposed to be fixed so that it didn't take a minute for all of the rawhide to drop on the ground. Please fix all of the materials just dropping as large drops as opposed to spilling out over multiple minutes if you happen to open up too many caches in a row. But let's talk about the expectation that you've set with Grim Favors. So running the new Witch Tides, super fun. Running to the Raven isn't even the most efficient thing that you can do. Sometimes teleporting to the tree and then immediately teleporting back to the content you were already doing is actually faster. So that's already like kind of shines a light on the problem here. I need to be able to save up my Grim Favors and then turn them in at my leisure. all in a lump sum. I can click through it multiple times, whatever needs to happen. Turning off the content and telling me you don't get to do anything anymore until you go run your errand and go back to the tree and get your cash and then come back is the biggest momentum killer in the game, and why I will, no joke, I can't stress this enough. If we just go back to do 2 things, get a turn in, go back to the tree, come back to my content, keep going, if that's what we go back to, I will literally never do another whisper turn in. I'm not boycotting this thing. I'm just letting you know my brain won't let me do that because I've experienced that it could be better, and I know that it could be even better. Please let us save up our Grim Favors, or let us do it from the map menu. Whatever needs to happen, don't make me go back to the tree every 5 minutes, interrupting my gameplay to get my reward to go back to doing my gameplay. And that, for right now, is the total list of feedback for major pain points and things I would ultimately like to see in this game. I know that still took me close to an hour. I apologize if you made it this far. Salutes off to you. Thank you so much. I hope that you resonated with some of it. Comment down below if you had different ideas, thought different things, different opinions, other things you would like to see. If you're new here, subscribe to the channel. I hope that this kind of content can go forward to continuing to give, a catalyst and a reason for the developers to look at these systems, potentially make them better for you and me, the people who are playing the game who like to enjoy it. And also that, hey, developer, if you also made it to this point, absolutely bananas, level ridiculous. Thank you very much. I hope you had like a long lunch break that you were able to watch this over. But I truly hope that that didn't really just come off as whining, and it more so just came off as a player experiencing the game, loving the game, and still having these frustration points, and trying to find a way to vocalize them in a way where it's digestible for you and you understand where those pain points are coming from, rather than it just getting screamed off into the void and being echoed around and kind of losing the totality of its context. But there you go. I'm not going to waste any more of your time. Again, subscribe to the channel if you're brand new here. Leave a like on it. Leave a comment. Let me know what you think. I love to hear from you. Thank you so much for watching this video. I truly, truly hope that it did something, and I look forward to seeing you in the next one.